Okay, so I want to speak a bit about Owen Smith. He is a Labour MP who, along with Angela Eagle, is now vying to be the new leader with the ongoing leadership election. Now, this seems to be quite a drawn out process. They're setting the date for September 24th. I think personally that seems to be too long. Just removing the topics a little bit one today. I think that personally seems to be too long because it seems to be the Labour Party right now doesn't need to be drawn out with a long leadership contest. I think they should make. I appreciate that there is, a process to go through, but it just seems like the last thing the Labour Party needs is a drawn out process. Um, so I watched the speech. I will say something that I think is important. I cannot judge any politician entirely based on one speech. I think that would be foolhardy. But I think Owen Smith came across to me quite well. Um, I'm not a Labour member, but I'm a centrist, and I'm looking right now for someone to lead Her Majesty's opposition that is a good, strong centrist that can offer a centre left alternative to Theresa May's government. You need a strong opposition in a democracy. Now, I've said that I'll support Theresa May 120% when it comes to the union, and that is the case. But I'm not a Tory, and there's many Tory areas I strongly disagree with. So just got to touch on a few of the things that Owen Smith. Well, firstly, about the man himself. He was born in Morecambe in 1970. Morecambe is, of course, in northwest England. Well, to those of my outside viewers who don't know, it's a seaside town in northwest England. Um, but he grew up in Wales and he represents the Welsh seat of Pontypridd. And in every sense, he's a Welshman. He definitely sounds Welsh. And there is a historic precedent for this. David Lloyd George, who's considered one of our greatest prime ministers, a great liberal prime minister of 100 years ago, was born in Manchester, but is always seen as the Welsh wizard. He's both controversial and a very important figure in British history, David Lloyd George. So Owen Smith wouldn't be the first English-born Welshman to ascend a major party role. Um, Just an interesting side note, and I don't know if anyone else has noticed this. We've had 54 prime ministers. Now, we haven't had any Prime Minister Smith before. That might sound like a trivial, unimportant point, and it is unimportant, but it's just something that I've noticed. That's interesting because Smith is actually the most common family name in this country. It's extremely common. You go into any street in Britain, shout out David Smith or Sarah Smith or something, there's a very strong chance someone will look out of the door. Smith is a very common name. I believe Jones is the second most common, and it's very common in Wales. And I believe Brown is the third most common family name. So it's interesting we've never had a Prime Minister Smith, though the Labour Party did have a leader from 1992 to 1994. John Smith was very popular within the Labour Party. He sadly died of a heart attack, and that really shocked the party. And that's when Tony Blair took over. Um, so yeah, that's not really. It's just a point of interest. But more importantly, what has Mr. Smith said? Um, I think he tried to get a very good balance. Like I said, I'm not going to judge an entire possible leadership based on one speech, but I think he got a good balance. He was talking about a lot of important things. He was touching on all the Labour principles and so on. He has said, though, and I think this really highlights what is happening at the heart of the Labour Party right now. He said it's all very well opposing austerity, but you have to make it clear what you actually advocate in place. Now the problem is, for the last 10 months or whatever it's been, Jeremy Corbyn has simply looked like a protest leader. Obviously, by nature of being in Her Majesty's opposition, your brief is to hold the government to account, but a strong opposition leader also needs to look like a prime minister in waiting. David Cameron looked like a prime minister in waiting. Tony Blair looked like a prime minister in waiting when they were opposition leaders. Jeremy Corbyn doesn't. He simply doesn't. My concern about the Labour Party, and this is as an outsider, Corbyn supporters are so deeply entrenched in the sectarian mindset, they're not willing to listen to any other point of view. And anyone who talks about these issues, they kind of jump on top of it and say that you're a traitor, or you're a Blairite, or there's no scope right now for, as someone pointed out, Labour is at real risk of becoming the new nasty party. Now, I have to say that with these attacks that have been happening recently, vandalism and so on, Momentum, which is a controversial hard left group very closely associated with Jeremy Corbyn, they've sort of emphasised that they had nothing to do with the attacks that are happening, and they abhor intimidation of MPs and this sort of thing. But it is irrefutable that since Jeremy Corbyn has become leader, there has been this atmosphere of hard left intolerance. It is irrefutable. And I'm not going to point a finger at any one individual, and I don't think it would be fair to blame Mr. Corbyn personally, but unquestionably there has been an atmosphere of intolerance within the Labour Party that to outsiders is deeply, deeply off-putting. And Corbynites annoy me because they cannot seem to realise it. They cannot seem to see the image that is coming across. Every time people question Jeremy Corbyn, they just make out that it's some sort of right-wing conspiracy, like it's Sky News or The Sun or whatever. Look, Sky News and The Sun, of course, are anti-Corbyn. They're conservative sources. But you cannot say that Ed Miliband is ideologically opposed to Jeremy Corbyn, that he's some sort of Blairite, or, there's many centre-left figures speaking out against this. Um, Owen Smith, I don't think you could call Owen Smith a Blairite. Um, as far as I know, he voted against the Iraq War. Incidentally, he mentioned Shellcops in his speech, and he made the very important point that Labour must learn from the mistakes of that, and it was a disaster. But at the same time, Labour's not a pacifist party. Now, it is important to say that because I think it would be a mistake for any leader, future prime minister, to say we're pacifists, we're never going to go to war. You simply cannot know future circumstances to make that sort of statement. So it is important that he said that. It is also important that they learn the mistakes from Shellcock. Labour, of course, is a party associated with Iraq. I still believe it was a deeply flawed mistake to go into Iraq. I have more ambiguous views about that now, but that's for another video. But I do stand by my view that it was a massive foreign policy disaster. And I'm not one of these people that sort of jumps on the bandwagon. I believe Mr. Trump is doing that. He claims he was against the Iraq War in 2003. We don't really know. He was a private citizen then. I find it hard to believe. I think Trump is a complete opportunist. But anyway, that's American politics. Sticking with Britain, he also importantly spoke about Clause 4. Now, Clause 4 was basically the part of the Labour Party constitution that was laid out by the sociologist Sidney Webb in 1917. It's extremely important within the party. It basically lays out Labour's kind of mission statement and goals for society. In 1995, it was reformed. This was after years of kind of Labour being seen as unelectable. In 1983, for example, the Labour Party manifesto under Michael Foot was described as the longest suicide note in history. Labour right now may be in an even worse state than it was then. And what happened? Margaret Thatcher got elected 3 times. And her party got elected 4 times. So, Labour, those people who support Jeremy Corbyn are very good at saying why they hate the Tories and why they hate Blairism, but they're not actually offering any answer for how to get government. And that's the thing that bugs me. How can they inspire the wider public if they're given the impression they don't even want to govern, they just want to protest and complain? Ideology is great, but unless you can enact ideology when you're in government, then it has very little meaning. And I'm not saying opposition is irrelevant. It's important to hold the government to account. But the fact of the matter is you get more legislation passed in government than outside it. So if those Corbynites really, really want to enact their socialist principles in government, they have to be looking at a viable way to get into government. Now, They're blaming the Labour MPs for standing edge against Jeremy Corbyn, but those 270 or 172 MPs, 179, I forget the exact figure, but it was a majority of the party. When they voted in this confidence of no motion, it was not some sort of Blairite coup. That's what McDonnell and Corbyn keep suggesting. Well, McDonnell actually went back on that, to be fair. But the impression they're giving is it's some sort of right wing plot. I think this is unprecedented in party history where you have such a divide between members and MPs. A few important things to remember. A lot of the members, we're talking about the members are supporting Corbyn. That's true. A lot of those members, though, are new members who came from hard left factions. They were not regular Labour Party members before 2015. So it's slightly misleading to insist that they are the real Labour Party. Owen Smith made a good point. He said, I'm not going to be pushed out of the party I love. Why should democratically elected MPs who've dedicated their lives to the Labour Party be shoved out because they're being tarnished as Blairites? These are people who have served as MPs, in some cases for many years. And, I just think it's absurd that we have this situation where people are just, it's almost like it's like the Cultural Revolution in China, and the Corbynistas are like the Red Guards. Obviously, these are metaphors. Obviously, people are not being lynched on the street and so on. But there has been an ugly atmosphere, and I think the Corbyn faction has shown deep intolerance. Not so much the man himself, but some of his supporters. And it is incredibly off putting, and they don't seem to care. Now, what Owen Smith alleged was that he went to meetings with Jeremy Corbyn 3 times to try and find an answer, and there was nothing that indicated to him that there was a satisfactory way forward. Apparently, John McDonnell suggested if the party splits, it splits. A while back, I was of the view that a party split is inevitable and the centrists should kind of form their own party. But now I understand why Owen Smith doesn't want that to happen. Because his view would be, why should one man split the entire party? Why should those MPs who care about the future of the party actually in government not do something to save it? I'm not going to come right out and say, oh, I want Owen Smith to be Labour leader or Prime Minister. I need look more into the man. I need to listen to more speeches and, really reflect on it. Even though I'm not a Labour member, I'm very interested and I do care a lot because it's very important that in 2020 or whenever it is that Theresa May calls the election, actually the public has now indicated, apparently some polls have suggested that people don't want an immediate election. There's only one thing I'm wary about with Owen Smith at the moment, and that is that he's pushing for a second EU referendum. He says that it won't be absolutely the case, but he thinks that he's arguing people were lied to with the first one. He needs to be very careful with that because all it's going to do is look like, the tune of a sore loser. I mean, I voted Remain, but those 17 million people who voted Leave, if they're being told that they voted for the right reason, but they made a mistake, people are going to take it to be a bit patronising, and I think that could backfire. So I'm not convinced that we should go for a second referendum. I think it's, those who vote Leave would simply say that the Remain side are being sore losers. And I'm not convinced that the Europeans would necessarily want it either. I think at this point they just want this to be an amicable divorce. Theresa May, of course, wants it to be a longer process because she wants to encompass all 4 home nations. I guess she's trying to find compromise with the Scottish nationalists. That's for another video. But I really think that the Labour Party is in a mess right now. And Corbyn supporters will say, oh, it's these Labour MPs that are destroying the party, it's a right-wing press and so on. They're not even open to the idea that Jeremy Corbyn is simply, it's all very well saying, oh, he's a humble man, he doesn't want to be Prime Minister. That's a problem. That is the problem. I want to see someone who actually has aspirations, who actually wants to be in number 10. I don't care if they're ambitious. Why do we have this idea that if a politician's ambitious, it's a bad thing? So what? People talk about career politicians and so on, and oh, Jeremy's humble. I want to see someone who actually has a vision for the future, and I don't think Jeremy Corbyn does. I think he is a man of protest, and that's it. Now, I know Corbyn supporters won't like me saying that, but they've really indicated nothing contrary to what I've just said. I want to see Corbyn supporters actually lay out their plan for getting into number 10, which, is about more than just attacking the Tories. It's easy to attack the Tories. I want to actually see some answers here. Um, I know it's not an easy task. I don't envy the job they've got being in opposition, but that's what they have to do. I also want Owen Smith to make a pledge to the union. Labour is sometimes blamed for giving Scotland and Wales devolution, which has, fostered this nationalist feeling. I don't know to what extent that is true or not true. The idea that if there was no devolution, there'd be no Scottish nationalism, I think is far fetched. But I do want Owen Smith or any British major party leader to make an absolute pledge that they will support the union 120%. That for me is one of the most critical issues we face. Now, a final word about Angela Eagle. I don't know why. I just don't get a strong vibe for her. I'm just not particularly impressed by her, and I can't explain why. I just can't explain why. I just don't see her as prime minister. I'm not saying that she's not capable, and she probably has more experience than Owen Smith. He has been shadow work and pensions and shadow minister for Wales, but so neither of them are complete backbenchers. But Owen Smith isn't well known in the country. I mean, he's not known virtually, except for those of us who are interested in politics. That's going to be a challenge for him, getting name recognition. It's going to take time. But I just hope Labour can get a leader who is a viable prime minister. With all due respect to Mr. Corbyn, he simply isn't. And yeah, that's the way I see it.